Okay, let's see if I can successfully.
Yeah, just start
Okay.
sharing. Yeah.
All right. Can you see that? Can you see the first slide for my presentation?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Thank you.
Yes, you can see. Is that a yes? You can see?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay.
We can see and hear you.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, my name is Rich Vlosky, and I'm the director of the Louisiana Forest Products Development Center here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, on the LSU campus. And I'm going to talk a little bit about wood-based energy and a focus on pellets. So we've had an eclectic group of speakers this morning, and so I'm glad that it kind of varied, and we heard some very technical presentations, and I'm a social scientist and do surveys and business development sorts of things, and am involved with a couple of biochar projects right now. So let's see if we can get this going. Come on, baby. There we go. All right, so this is what I'm going to talk about. I've got 20 minutes, so we're going to kind of rocket through this. Quick slide on the global perspective of renewable energy, what's happening in the U.S. with energy consumption and production. Where does wood fit into the equation? What are some biomass sources here in the U.S. and Canada and other countries as well? And conversion options. And then I'll talk a little bit about pellets, which is an area that I've been working in quite deeply with graduate students and companies. And then we'll wrap it up, and if there's any questions, we can go there. So if we look at the world generation and consumption of energy, we see that fossil fuels really haven't changed over the last 10 years. And I suspect that we're not going to see a dramatic change in fossil fuel production. We may even see an increase in production over the next few years, particularly because of the invasion in Ukraine and the fact that Russia supplies 30% of natural gas and 40% of oil to the EU, so prices are going to go up. And I think that offshore drilling is going to increase, and we're going to see an increase in at least domestic production of fossil fuels, oil and natural gas. We look at biomass, and we see that it's about 11%, all renewables are about 11%, increased somewhat in the last 10 years. Modern renewables, that includes geothermal, solar, wind, and the percentages are pretty small, about 2.4%, with biomass included in all of these other renewable sources of energy. The greatest use of wood in the world is for firewood, so that's traditional. That's a traditional energy source. So when we say modern renewables, we're talking about wind, solar, hydro, and wood, and other cellulosic materials. Working with a biochar project using sugar cane waste, which is called a gas. So we see that this is interesting. Renewables have increased to the point where it exceeds other sources of energy in the U.S. And so that's really good, particularly with the fact that coal is in decline and hopefully will continue to be in decline. The previous administration in the United States was bullish on coal, and it was actually attempting to turn that around and increase coal production for energy in the U.S. When we look at consumption, renewables, as we saw in the previous slide, globally was about 11%, and it's really about the same for the United States. And you split that out, you look at the bar chart, you see the bottom purple segment of that bar, and wood is about 20% of those renewables, which equates to 2.2% of total electricity consumption in the US. Drivers for wood energy are kind of were initiated with an artificial economic platform, and the things that promulgated the use of wood-based energy. So the environment, those environmental issues at the top, carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases, it's a huge issue. We know we may be beyond the point of no return when it comes to how we're treating the earth and what the implications are for every country and every human being on the planet. There's also industry concerns and industry lobbying. What really drives the wood-based side of it is incentives, policies, legislation, and government intervention. As I said, it's kind of an artificial economic platform right now, because without these incentives and policies and legislation, wood-based energy would not be happening to any great extent in the US. And at the bottom there, we have additional subsidies and mandates that are given both on the supply side and on the demand side. And I'll talk about that now. At the supply side, so there are mandates and incentives and subsidies that are provided to wood-based energy, biofuel producers, cellulosic energy producers, pellet producers, of which 95% goes overseas. But be that as it may, it's a thriving industry that utilizes resources and provides alternative sources of income and markets for forest landowners, tax policies and the like. And in the US, the Department of Energy, Agriculture, and Defense are investing heavily in wood-based biofuels and bioenergy. And in addition, there's downstream value-added products from the types of processes that you all know about that can produce very high-value chemicals and other byproducts. On the demand side for wood-based energy, the greatest influencer is the EU. They have significant mandates, goals that they will achieve over the next 10 to 20 years. They also are a much greener kind of psyche for the EU relative to the US. So this is ingrained in the EU, so it's not a big stretch for them to want to transfer, to migrate from coal, nuclear, etc., to renewable energy. This one point here is to cut CO2 emissions by at least 40% by 2030, and 2030 is right around the corner for us. We will all, God willing, be alive in 2030, and we'll see if these mandates and incentives actually are come to pass. Germany is looking to phase out nuclear energy altogether. France depends heavily on nuclear energy, but they're also trying to reduce their dependence on nuclear power. These are just some examples, many examples. RED 1 and RED 2 are a couple of EU directives that guide these goals and mandates for the EU over the next 15 to 20 years. And you can see here what they're really looking to do. is to develop energy targets for renewables, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and improvements in efficiency on the production side of renewable energy. With the EU, back in 2011 to 2019, renewables were targeting coal. And we see from that period to now that coal consumption and use has declined from 34% to 7%. So now the target is natural gas, the other major fossil fuel that runs the world. So as an aside, that's what's being targeted now, is natural gas. A couple of other countries, regions around the world are also becoming more cognizant of what they can do with regard to these policy structures to ameliorate global climate change, global warming, and they have some very ambitious goals as well. So Japan is really moving forward in a very ambitious way to accomplish this, and this has implications for demand for pellets, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But all these things contribute and are a part of Japan's efforts to become more reliable on renewable resources, renewable energy resources. Same thing with South Korea. They have a new basic plan. They've had basic plans since its inception as a democracy, after being a military, essentially a military dictatorship a number of years ago. Mainly wind and solar is what they are focusing on. They are very much into trading and being a part of the global renewable energy credit markets. And they have specific emissions trading programs or schemes, if you will, that all lead to the same objectives that we've talked about in Japan. And once again, this has significant implications for South Korea to become an emerging market for wood pellets for generating electricity. And that's what these exports are for, is to generate electricity and replace coal and other fossil fuels. So this is a schematic of where wood goes traditionally, and things, and it's used by a lot of people in a lot of countries, and it impacts all of our lives in one way, shape, or another. But biomass is the focus of the research I'm doing now, and also this presentation. Wood energy in the U.S. It's the most common source of heat. And it's interesting to me that 84% of all biomass that's used in electricity generation is for combined heat and power at the manufacturing facilities that make the initial wood products. So we're looking at lumber, we're looking at plywood mills. I have been to a number of mills where the bark and what we call end cuts or waste is used to generate steam, which in turn runs the facility. And I've actually seen companies that had to buy bark and other reciduals from other providers so that they can run their plant when the price of natural gas is or was and is high. So they can change between natural gas and biomass. Sources of biomass in the U.S., Canada. You have a lot of hurricanes. I live right there, and we have hurricanes, and hurricanes blow down a lot of trees. And Hurricane Katrina, which was the hurricane that destroyed New Orleans, the largest city in the state, and put it about 3 or 4 feet underwater. And a lot of trees blew down. 11 years of hardwood production, hardwood harvest, blew down, and about 7 years of softwood material also blew down. And there was no mechanism to utilize this wood at all. So here we are, 15 years later, and it's still in the forest, deteriorating and degrading. So planning ahead to be able to utilize that kind of timber is important, and the best and highest and best value in use is to go to chips, which in turn go to pellets, or it can go to composite panels, or it can go to even the pulp and paper industry if possible. The second picture here is from a tornado that hit not too far from where I live. And that's another microclimatic event where it would be very helpful if mills were in place to be able to accept this material, to make something productive out of it and clear the forest floor. Fires. We are now in the United States right now, 30% higher than the 10-year average for fires, and we're only in April. The West is burning up. We've got a 20-year drought. It's not going to abate anytime soon. As an aside, the water reservoirs for like Los Angeles is they're like 60% of their capacity, and they're rapidly declining, and are being they're, because of the drought and lack of snowpack, water is going to become a major issue, and it actually is a major issue right now. So cleaning out the forest fuels, the ladder fuels that exist, is an important remedy, not only to precluding these conflagrations and massive fires and dislocation of people, but it also helps the forest. It's a no-brainer. So much of the forests that are owned by governments in the U.S., 70% of the western forests are owned by the federal government, and it takes an act of God to harvest without environmentalists taking the entity to court before a harvest can take place. This kind of behavior and this kind of legislation that leads to legislation or gets tied up in the courts is very short-sighted. I'm nothing against environmentalists at all, but just in this particular case, taking out fuel and ameliorating forest fires is very important. And then this is beetle kill. Millions of hectares of pine beetle have killed trees in British Columbia, the Pacific Northwest. We have our own problems here in the South with different insects killing trees, and they're just beginning over the last 5 years to realize that, hey, this is a good source of wood if we can get it out of the forest. Number one, in time, without bringing the infestation to another part of the forest, to utilize for primary wood product materials, and the chip industry, which once again goes into a number of downstream, highly value-added products. So those are the 4 kind of natural biomass sources. We look at primary mills. I've already talked about this, and this accounts once again for 84% of wood waste that goes into biomass, which goes into production of wood-based energy. And these are the clusters of where these primary mill resources are in the US. And then we look at secondary mills: furniture, flooring, millwork, doors, and this has not been a very good source of material because it's so dispersed. There's many smaller wood manufacturing facilities that make furniture and those other products that I mentioned. So the volumes are low. They're often pieces are painted or lacquered or glued. So this typically finds its way to landfills. There are entities that go around in an economically effective radius to collect wood from secondary manufacturers and then sort and utilize that for biomass downstream products, including wood-based bioenergy. So overall, unless you have that kind of collection structure, it's not a good source. It's not an effective or cost-effective source. This is where secondary mill residues are found, where the manufacturing takes place in the US. So much wood, millions of tons of wood goes to our landfills all over the world, but you can see that's not going to really find its way into any wood products facility. If you're going to make anything, biochar, any sort of torrefied wood, pellets, or anything, it has to be clean. And that process of cleaning this type of wood is exorbitant. There have been some examples where folks are sorting wood at the landfills before the trucks make their way in, or right after they have dumped their load. But once again, it's time consuming and it's difficult to segregate wood that can actually be used. You know, you're talking about nails and treated wood. None of us would want to put treated wood pellets in our barbecues. So that's an example of another possibility, but not really effective. And that's urban wood waste. So post-harvest residuals. This is a major source of wood material, feedstock material for wood-based energy. Once again, this material has to be clean. So when I was a forester, we would just burn this in the forest. And if you do extract it from the forest, it needs to be cleaned, sorted, and the like, because it's a very mixed material, some of which can be used and some of which needs to be culled out. So that's a yes, and this is where forest residues predominate in the US. Fast-growing trees. Now, this is exciting and has the highest potential, I think, for feedstock for any of the things that we're talking about. In the upper left here, this is a 3-year-old tree, eucalyptus from Australia. Paulownia is another species. Once again, this is a 3-year-old plantation. Hybrid poplar has been used in the US for decades and decades. When I was in graduate school in the Pacific Northwest, I'd drive up the highway and see poplar stands that would be used for pulp and paper mill feedstock. And this is, again, eucalyptus in Brazil, 6-year rotation age. So very fast growing and a good source, a very good source of woody material. A friend of mine started this company, Futura Gene, in Israel, subsequently sold the company, But this is a genetically modified tree. The previous examples that I showed you were cultivated, and they were naturally growing trees that over time, through selection and nursery production and grafting and such, produce those fast-growing qualities. This is genetically modified, and we see here that these are people, and these trees are 5 years old. You can watch them grow if you stand by them. It's amazing. Here's an example of a plantation of this Arborgen. It's now Arborgen is growing these trees, and Futurigene. And once again, this is what it looks like. So it's a very, very, very fast rotation crop of trees. So wood to energy, we all are familiar with these broad categories. Solid biofuels, that's the area I work in. Liquid biofuels, which we've talked about, previous presenters, and gaseous biofuels. Gasification to electricity is really something that is of interest and has a lot of, currently has a lot of interest and growth globally. What goes to the EU from the United States is used to burn and to replace coal as in power plants in the UK. And of course you can, did you have a comment? Okay. So you can refer to other co-products and chemicals. This is an example of a this entire gasification system fits in a container, and an area that I've been working with thanks to my graduate students over the last 4 years, 5 years or so, is off-grid microscale biomass electricity. So in India and Sri Lanka is where I've been working with graduate students who have started renewable energy centers. They're both professors in their respective countries, to be able to generate electricity in villages that are off the grid. And this has that are near wood-based or cellulosic-based feedstock. Pine straw is one, agricultural residues another, and wood-based is another. But this has significant ramifications for developing country economic development. This is what you are all experts in, so I'm not going to even talk about it. But pyrolysis, briquettes, torrefied biomass, and biochar, which is what we are talking about today. One way to kind of soothe the concerns of the coal industry, because it does employ a lot of people around the world, and some countries are actually increasing their use of coal to generate power. But to mix wood in with coal is one possible option. So that way wood is used and coal is used, and both industries can benefit. There's some concerns with wood relative to coal: storage, moisture content, boiler retrofitting, ash content is higher, and mold can grow on woody material, but it can't grow on coal. So pellets is where really things are happening in wood-based energy. From North America, this is both US and Canada. We are the major supplier to the EU, 5.76 million metric tons, and that other 4 million tons goes primarily to Japan and South Korea. Intra-Europe, is another 0.23 million metric tons. Vietnam is now becoming a major producer of pellets, and Indonesia is becoming a major producer of pellets intra-Southeast Asia. And Russia produces about 1.2 million metric tons. The EU is looking to wean themselves off of Russian feedstock and replace that with feedstock from North America, which they can easily grow. The southern part of the United States is where everything is happening in wood-based pellets. 75% of what is produced in the US is in the South, and I live right there. So I'm in a good place to be in this kind of research. 98% of all wood pellet exports leave from southern ports. So it creates a number of jobs at port facilities. There's a lot of multiplier effects for the industry, and it's growing dramatically in the South. This is the production of wood pellets to be shipped for export, to be used for energy. The UK is the #1 export market for both the US and Canada, and will remain so for the next few years, and other countries will begin to increase their importation of pellets or their domestic production of pellets as they forest land area. So final things to say, wood biomass, particularly pellets, is really the focus of what's going on in the US. We can make biofuels. It's extraordinarily expensive. We can do it. You guys are scientists and you can do anything. I'm amazed at what can be done, but to do it in economically and at scale, that's where some challenges come into play. So in the long term, and I think the midterm and the short term, that wood and even other cellulosic based materials are going to be very much in play and very much in demand to replace traditional fossil fuels. It's still a very, very high component of what we use in the world. It's not going away anytime soon, but wind, solar, hydro, and my favorite, wood, is going to be part of the equation. So with that, I thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak with you. It's 20 after 11 in the morning here, and I guess you are from different parts of the world, so I hope it's not too late for some of you, that you're not getting ready for bed yet. But anyway, it's been very interesting for me to participate in this. And if you have any questions, comments, ideas for joint research, I do market research, market development, business development. That's me, and you can find me an email. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.